Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Bo, begins on page 341. Page 341 in the Article Stone Chumash, it is Shemos Parak Yud, chapter 10. And the Parsha begins, Hashem said to Moshe, come to Paro, for I have made his heart and the heart of his servant stubborn, so I can put these signs of mine in his midst. And so that you may relate in the ears of your son and your son's sons that I made a mockery of Egypt and my signs that I placed among them, that you may know that I am Hashem. Yeah, I have one. So here the Torah is kind of telling us what exactly the purpose of the plagues is, and that's as it says here, so that you could relate in the ears of your son and your son's sons that leaving Egypt, all these wonders were designed to be something that's passed down through the generations to your son, for him to pass down to his son, which is what happens with the Seder. That's why the Seder is so meaningful, that Hashem did arranged the whole leaving Egypt is that it could be something that would be passed down through the generations. About that, I made a mockery of Egypt, that it was almost like Hashem was toying with them, that he didn't just take us out and there's nothing they could do to us, but he was toying with them, sending them a plague until they were ready to send us out, then taking it away, and then they took it back. And again, it's sending them a plague, so they're ready to send us out, and then taking the plague away, so then they could retract. It's almost like a cat toying with the mouse, like catching it and almost eating it, but then letting it go, so it thinks that it could get away, and then catching it again and again and again. And what was this for? It was in order that, in verse 2, so that you, where am I? And my signs that I placed among them, page 341. My signs that I placed among them, that you may know that I am Hashem. That we have this wonder, all these wonders that Hashem did, that were signs, means things that are completely beyond the realm of what's possible in the physical world, were experienced in order that we know that Hashem, that He is Hashem. And as we said in last week's parsha, where it said that I appeared to Avram and Yitzchak with the name, and Yaakov with the name Shakai. They did not know my name Hashem. The Ramban says that the name, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, the Ramban says, signifies God working completely outside the physical world, not Hashem hidden, directing things from within, but Hashem working, I should say, working or acting outside of the rules of nature. And that showing that he's not bound by the rules of nature. He doesn't exist physically. It's a spiritual thing that doesn't exist in the physical world. And that's when it's so that you may know that I am Hashem, so you may know that I save and I fulfill my promises in a completely miraculous manner, not bound by the rules of this world. Okay, so in verse 3, Moshe and Aaron came to Paro and said to him, so said Hashem, God of the Hebrews, until when will you refuse to be humbled before me? Send out my people that they may serve me, for if you refuse to send forth my people, behold, tomorrow I shall bring a locust swarm into your borders. And it'll cover everything in a way that, in verse 5, it will cover the surface of the earth so that one will not be able to see the earth and will consume the remaining residue that was left to you by the hail. That the hail came and, in the end of last week's Parsha, the hail came and destroyed anything that had some hardness to it. Anything that grew that was mature enough that it was brittle, that was hard, so that the hail destroyed. But the young plants that were still soft, so that wasn't destroyed by the hail, because the hail would hit it and then it's flexible enough to absorb that and then spring back up. So that was those things that were eaten by the locusts were to be eaten by the locusts. So this will consume really everything that's left. And it says in verse 6, they will fill your houses, the houses of all your servants, the houses of all of Egypt, such as your fathers and your grandfathers have not seen from that day, from the day they came onto the earth until this day, meaning that this wasn't a normal plague of locusts, which happens. Locusts are a natural phenomenon, that there's they swarm and they're blown by the wind, and they land somewhere and they eat it clean. And yes, they're edible. Not only are they edible, that there are some kinds of locusts that are kosher. I don't know if that's correct. I don't know. That I haven't seen. But oh yeah? Okay. That's interesting. That you're saying these they couldn't eat. Okay, but this wasn't a normal swarm of locusts. It was something beyond what a normal swarm would be. It's something that they've never seen before and haven't seen since. And he turned and left Paro's presence. And Paro's servant said to him, "How long will this be a snare for us?" And so the commentaries comment that it says he turned and left Paro's presence. That implies that he left without permission. And that's not something you do in front of a king. You don't just turn around and turn your back on him and leave. You wait till you're dismissed. Even if it's not a king, even if it's even if it's a judge. When you're in court and you don't get up and you don't leave until the judge tells you could leave. And here they're standing in front of the king of Egypt, and it says he turned and left. And the Ramban comments that Moshe saw that Paro's servants were, where am I? Paro saw that Moshe saw that Paro's advisors and his servants who were around were starting to mumble amongst themselves, that they were starting to be swayed to his side to let the Jews go. So rather than just keep on talking to Paro, a lot of times the best way to convince someone is let them convince themselves. And the worst thing you could do is start talking. That especially when someone's starting to be convinced, you have to keep quiet and let them convince themselves. And when he saw that they were moving in that direction, he left so they would be able to talk amongst themselves. And that's what happened. In verse 7, Paro's servant said to him, "How long will this be a snare for us? Send out the men that they may serve Hashem their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is lost?" So he's starting to get the advisors on his side. So Moshe and Aaron were returned to Paro, and he said to them, "Go and serve Hashem your God." Which ones are going? Moshe said, on page 343, verse 9, Moshe said, "With our youngsters, which are elders, shall we go. With our sons, with our daughters, with our flocks, with our cattle shall we go, because it is a festival of Hashem." And then verse 10, Paro said to them, "So be Hashem with you, as I will send forth with your children. Look, the evil intent is opposite your faces. Not so. Let the men go now. Serve Hashem, for that is what you seek." And he drove them out from Paro's presence. So before I go back to the beginning of this conversation, it says, "Look, the evil intent is opposite your face," in verse 10. What does that mean? The evil intent is opposite your face. So the Ramban understands what it means is that I see if you're saying that you want to take everyone, you want to take the women, the children, the men, the animals, you're planning on leaving. I understand that. I understand what's going on here, and I'm not fooled that if you will leave some things behind. You don't pack up everything you own to go on a short, go for a short vacation. If you're taking everything you own, everyone, it's because you're not planning on coming back. So he says, "See, the evil intent is opposite your faces." He's saying, "I see your evil intent, and it will blow up in your face, and now I won't let you go at all, even to celebrate your party." The Rashi, though, says, "Look, the evil," and he says, "I see," literally the Hebrew there is, "Re'u ki ra'a neged penechem." Behold, I see evil in front of your face, or opposite your face. And the Rashi quotes the Medrash that he was saying that Paro said that I'm an astrologer. I understand what the stars are telling us. And he says that right now, what's powerful based on astrology is the planet Mars. You can look up right now, see it in the eastern sky. He says what's powerful right now is the planet Mars. And Mars it's a red planet, and in astrology it symbolized blood. And he said, I could see that if you leave now, astrology dictates that there's blood in your future. And that's what he was saying. He's saying it's not a good time to go, just astrology-wise, as if he cares about their well-being. And our sages say that, in fact, it was true, that astrology did dictate that there was blood in our future, but it was actually fulfilled not by our blood, but the blood of the bris milah, of the circumcisions that we would have, and the blood of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal Lamb. So there was blood in our future, but it wasn't the blood, our blood being spilled. Okay, but back to the beginning of this conversation, and that at the top of the page 353 in verse 8 it says, "Which ones are going?" What does that mean? Which ones are going? And the implication was, is it the children going, or is it the animals going? Meaning the men, of course, are going to go. Are the children going to go, or the animals going to go? But one of them is going to be left behind. What's the meaning of that? So the Malbim explains, and he has an approach really to this whole section that I think is beautiful. The Malbim understands that One second. Okay. So the Malbim understands that the Paro was a pagan, that the Egyptians worshipped multiple deities, and they had a whole like pantheon, not the Greek pantheon, they had their own. They had Isis and Ra, and I'm not really familiar, and the guys with the eagle's head and the guy with the jackal head, they had a whole group of them. And um, in a pagan approach to life, how they viewed religion was that you have beneficent deities and you have evil deities, and you have deities that are out there to give blessing and to do good to you, and you have deities that bring bad things. And the two don't mix, because why would a beneficent, why would a being that's out there just to be gracious to us, why would he cause bad things to happen? So, in order to answer this question, why do bad things happen to good people and stuff like that, their answer was because there's this bad deity who's causing that to happen. And then when something good happens, there's the good deity that's having that to happen. Like you find even with there are those who believe in God and the devil, and that the devil has power, the devil's fighting against God. There are those who believe that that you have God is the benevolent being, and then you have the devil who's making bad things happen, and they're at war with each other. But we don't. But we understand that there's no other power other than God, and anything that appears bad that's happening, there's a reason behind it, and it's really for our benefit. But everything comes from the same source. And we actually express that beautifully in our blessing that we say before the Shema every morning, that the first blessing we say after Yishtabach, we say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you Hashem, Yotzer Or Uborei Choshech, thank you. He forms light, he creates light and creates darkness, he makes peace and creates everything. But it's actually based on a verse in the prophets that says, that he makes peace and creates evil.
He forms light and creates darkness. Makes peace and
creates evil. That the light and darkness and
creates all.
It doesn't say evil. It creates all. It's actually coming from the verse that says evil, but for reasons we don't say evil. But I also heard I actually read from Rav Reisman. He has a book in the Pathways of the Prophets, where he says that later in that bracha, we say. Many times, like with great feeling, especially on Shabbos, the Chazan says, Kulam ahovim, kulam barim, kulam gibarim. It means that they're all, they're all clear, they're all mighty. Maybe I will take this. Article will translate better than me. Much better than me. Yeah, they are all beloved. Oh, it's before that. Oh, here. They are all beloved. They are all flawless. They are all mighty. They all do the will of their Maker with dread and reverence, and they open their mouths in holiness and purity and sung in hymn, bless and praise, glorify, revere, sanctify, declare the kingship of the name of God. So we're talking about the angels here. And he asks, why is that relevant? Meaning, why is what the angels doing relevant to our lives? That we talk about how the angels, they're all beloved, they're all flawless, they all do the will of their Maker. What's that relevant to us? And he answered that the point here is that they are all beloved. This is in that blessing, like we said, that's introduced with that Hashem creates everything. Good things that happen and seemingly bad things that happened are all created by Hashem. The angels, what we call angels, are agents of Hashem's will. They're these powers that Hashem sends to fulfill his will. Let's say, if someone's supposed to be healed, so Hashem sends this agent of his will, this expression of his will to heal that the person should be healed. If the person's supposed to get sick, Hashem sends an agent of his will, Hashem sends an expression of his will that the person is sick, should get sick. And these are and in angelic terms, we'd call the healing angel Raphael, the healing of God, and maybe the one that causes him to get sick, maybe Gavriel, the strength of God, which is an expression of Hashem's judgment. But what are we saying here? that they're all flawless. Where are we? Yeah, they're all flawless. They're almighty. They all do the will of their maker with dread and reverence, meaning that whichever mission they're on, whether it's the angel that's making the person sick or the angel making the person healed, they're all flawless, they're all beloved, and they're all doing the expression, they're all fulfilling the will of their maker, that they're all fulfilling the will of Hashem. That we don't believe in powers that are in conflict in the spiritual world, that there's only one power. And that is Hashem. But back to Paro. Paro believed that if a good thing happened, it's because of the good deity, and if the bad thing happened, it's because of the evil deity. So he was saying that who's going? Are you taking the children or are you taking the animals? Because in his mind, if you're taking animals, you're slaughtering animals, what could be the possible purpose for that? You have violence and blood. The only purpose for that in Paro's mind is to appease this God, that's evil God that wants violence, that wants pain. So to appease that will for pain and violence, we express it on an animal, so he won't take it out on us. That's in Paro's mind, that's what animal sacrifice was. And when that's going on, when you have a festival for that deity, you don't bring the children along. Because if maybe that God won't be satisfied with the animals and maybe will want more violence and more blood and want the children to be sacrificed. So you keep the children far away from that festival. So and the opposite is also true. If you're bringing along the children, so that would indicate that this is a benevolent deity who's there to give blessing and it's happy and you want the children there. So in that case, why would you bring the animals? There's no use for animal sacrifice because why would a benevolent deity want blood and violence?
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody who's Christian about
Yeah.
this concept. They can't understand how there's no devil.
Right, and that's where I'm coming from, is that there is that belief of God and the devil at war. And Judaism does not believe in that at all, that there's any possibility for struggle. Yeah. Okay. So that was Paro was saying. And then later, when Mo went later, Paro accepted, okay, I was wrong. So it's not the evil deity because you don't want to because the animals, whatever. He says that we'll get there when we get there. Okay. And that's what he was saying in verse 10. So be Hashem with you as I will send you forth with your children. Look, the evil intent is opposite your faces. The Malbim understands that means that if you bring the animals, it's to serve the evil God, the one that wants violence. So then don't bring the children because that so be Hashem with you as I'll send you forth with your children. That's like an oath that if I would send your children, I'm not going to allow you to do that because you're going to that evil deity. He's going to want the children as a sacrifice too. Okay, so then they brought the locusts, and the locusts ate all of the grass and the soft vegetation. And in verse 16, Paro hastened to summon Moshe and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned to Hashem, your God, and to you, and now please forgive my sin just this time, and entreat Hashem, your God, that he remove from me only this death. He left Paro and entreated Hashem, and Hashem turned back a very powerful west wind. It carried the locust swarm and hurled it towards the Sea of Reeds. Not a single locust remained within the border of Egypt. Okay, and I think here the Medrash says that not a single locust remained, meaning that that they couldn't even eat them. This is not exactly what was said in the name of Rabbi Frost. There might be another Medrash, but that every single locust was blown away, so they didn't have any benefit from this. They couldn't even eat them. And the Rashi quotes a Medrash that even if they would have like salted some locusts to preserve so they could eat it, even those were blown away by this wind, so they didn't even have any benefit. They couldn't even eat a single locust. They were all removed from Egypt. But Hashem strengthened the heart of Paro. He did not send out the children of Israel. Okay, then the ninth plague was the plague of darkness. It says in page 345, Hashem said to Moshe, stretch forth your hand towards the heaven. There shall be darkness upon the land of Egypt, and the darkness will be tangible. Moshe stretched forth his hand towards the heavens. There was a thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for a 3-day period. No man could see his brother, nor could anyone rise from his place for a 3-day period. But for all the children of Israel, there was light in their dwellings. Here the Medrash says, or actually, the Medrash says that they couldn't even move. The Ramban explains that the darkness here, it wasn't just a lack of light. It wasn't like the sun wasn't shining. It wasn't dark like the darkest night or like in a cave. Then you could light a candle and you're fine pretty much. We had a loss of power for a week here for most people, and it was difficult, but we had flashlights and we got by at night. Oh, some people just left. Yeah. Yeah. What's that?
We had no problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was hot, and we needed lanterns and candles and flashlights. We got by. Oh, you had electricity. Oh, you had
We did not have any power line.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. Okay. And most of Groveland did. I guess you were like right in the cutout of Groveland. Okay. So, but the Ramban says that here it was almost like a mist. It was like a dense fog that descended on Egypt that light couldn't penetrate. And he was saying it's just like, when there's a very dense fog, headlights don't help you in the car. And they actually hurt you because it just bounces back on the fog and blinds you. And he says that the candles wouldn't even stay lit, like in a room, like in a pit that's like devoid of air. That candles just go out. And he says that like this was such like a dense fog that the light wouldn't work, and it would put them out, so they couldn't see anything. They couldn't function. And then he asked Moshe to daven, and Moshe davened, and he said, "Okay." In verse 27, Hashem strengthened the heart of Paro. He did not wish to send them out, as Paro had said to him, "Go from me, beware, do not see my face anymore. From the day you see my face, you shall die." Paro was so angry with Moshe, he said, "Just you won't even see my face again." And Moshe said, "You have spoken correctly. I shall never see your face again." Okay. On page 347, there's with the plague of the firstborn. Hashem, 347, this is chapter 11. Hashem said to Moshe, "One more plague shall I bring upon Paro and upon Egypt. After that, he shall send you forth from here. When he sends forth, it shall be complete. He shall drive you out here. Please speak in the ears of the people. Let each man request of his fellow, and each woman from her fellow silver vessels and gold vessels." And Hashem granted the people favor in the eyes of Egypt. Moreover, the man Moshe was very great in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of the servants of Paro, in the eyes of the people. And the commentaries say that this is amazing, that in spite of the fact that the Egyptians suffered so greatly as a result of this plagues, and they knew why they were having the plagues. They knew that Moshe was going to Paro and telling him that this is going to happen if you don't set the Jews out, and he didn't listen, and the plagues came. The people knew that. But in spite of the fact that the land was being destroyed because of the Jews, still they instead of hating them, they respected them. And they recognized, yes, we deserve this. We mistreated the Jews and we deserve what we're getting. And when they asked for their riches, their wealth, they gave it over willingly as a loan, but they gave it over as friends, they gave it over in friends. And as an aside, why they have to ask permission to take it? Why do they have to take it as a loan and borrow it and then run away with it instead of just taking it? So I think on the Vilna Gaon, I'm not 100% sure where I saw this, but that it's measure for measure, that the same way that the Egyptians introduced us to slavery through deception, like we said in Parshas Shemos. Yeah, in Parshas Shemos, we said that originally it was like a national tax, labor tax, that everybody participated in a building project, and then slowly the Egyptians slipped away and they appointed taskmasters, and we couldn't leave the service. But it didn't start off straight as slavery. So too, when we left with deception as well. And with this saying, we left saying that we were going to only be gone for we're going to go a 3-day journey and celebrate a holiday, and that they were going to borrow stuff. And it was through deception instead of straight up just leaving and telling, "You're sending us out and we're going out." Okay. So in verse 4, Moshe said, on page 347, verse 4, Moshe said, "So says Hashem, about midnight I shall go out in the midst of Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Paro who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the maidservant who is behind the millstone, and all the firstborn of beasts, there shall be a great outcry in the entire land of Egypt, such as there has never been, such as there will never be again. But against all the children of Israel, no dog shall wet its tongue, against neither man nor beast, so that you shall know that Hashem will have differentiated between Egypt and Israel. So, the commentaries here say that all the firstborn are going to die. This is the 10th of the plagues that will end up causing Paro to send us out. And it says that against the children of Israel, no dog shall wet its tongue. So the commentaries say that means that with this great outcry in Egypt, the Jews will have such tranquility, so much comfort that they don't even have the dogs barking at them. And I think the Rabbeinu Bachya says that the dogs here is a metaphor for the destroying angel. It's that the expression of Hashem's judgment, that when it's sent out, usually it doesn't differentiate. When there's a plague, so people are struck down left and right. And it's compared to a dog because a dog is never satisfied. A dog is never full. People say that I'm as hungry as a dog. That a dog is always, that in the Medrash, the dog is always ravenous, is always hungry and never satisfied. And the destructive force is also never satisfied. It's always more and more and more. And but they said that at this time it left the Jewish people alone and only brought judgment against the Egyptians. Okay, and he said, then all these servants of yours will come down to me and bow to me, saying, leave you and your entire people that follows you. After that, I will leave. And he left Paro's presence in a burning anger. Hashem said he won't listen to you, and this plague will come. So they'll see these wonders, and then we'll go out. Okay, then on page 349, chapter 12, we have the first mitzvah in the Torah that was given to the Jewish people as a people, not just individuals, like Avram was given the mitzvah of bris milah, of circumcision. Here it's when we were a people, when we were a nation. This is the first mitzvah we got communally, and this is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. So Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying that this month shall be for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first month of the year. This is actually understood in two different ways, both true amongst our sages. Is that first of all, it's saying the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, that this month, it's saying this moon is the moon that begins. This is what the moon looks like when the month starts, that we would establish when a month begins through testimony to court that they saw the new moon. And the word here is this, zos, in the Hebrew it's HaChodesh Hazeh, this month or this moon, meaning this is something that you could point at. When the Torah used the word this. And the Medrash says that Moshe didn't understand what exactly amount you needed for it to be considered a new moon, and Hashem showed him the image of what the moon would look like when it's a new moon. And this is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, that the month begins when the court receives testimony that a new moon was sighted. But additionally, they interpret it to mean that this month, the month of Nisan, is to be the first month of the year. Interestingly, it's not the first month of the calendar year. That the calendar year starts from Rosh Hashanah. Right now, the Hebrew year is 5785, and when it doesn't become 5786 when Nisan starts, it becomes 5786 Rosh Hashanah, which is the first of Tishrei. So what does it mean this is the first month of the year? So nowadays, we count the months, the Hebrew months, with names. Like I said, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul. These are the names of Tishrei. These are the names of the months of the year. Those are Persian or Aramaic, Akkadian names. But in the Torah, the months are called by numbers. It's the first month. The same way that the days of the week in Hebrew are Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi is day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. We just call it by the number. So the months are also called by the number, but the numbers start from Nisan. And that's what Hashem's telling him, is that when you count the months, you count them from Nisan, in order that every time you talk about a date, it brings back, it's month 1 of when Hashem took us out from Egypt. It's month 2 from when Hashem took us out from Egypt. It's month 3 when Hashem took us out from Egypt. So anytime we're talking about dates, we have this reminder that of the first month where Hashem took us out from Egypt, and that's what we count from. So the Ramban asks, if that's the case, so why did we change it? Why don't we still call months by number, and why do we use these Akkadian or Persian names? And he answers that that it's a fulfillment of a verse from the prophets that just like we will remember the miracles of Hashem taking us out of Egypt, we'll remember the miracles of Hashem bringing us back to the land of Israel. And the Ramban says that was fulfilled when Hashem brought us back to Israel to build the second temple, when we returned from the Persian exile to build the second temple, and therefore we use these Persian and Akkadian names so we could remember every time we say a month, we call it Nisan. Why is it called Nisan? Why are we using this Akkadian name for the month? It reminds us we were in exile in Persia, and we were exiled by the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and it reminds us of that, and still Hashem brought us out. So we have a reminder of that exile and that redemption whenever we talk about dates. Okay, and then there's the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, of the Paschal offering, the Paschal Lamb, on page 351, chapter 12, verse 3. Speak to the entire assembly of the land of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they shall take for themselves each man a lamb or a kid for each father's house. Kid here means a young goat. A lamb or a kid for his household. In verse 5, an unblemished lamb or kid, a male, within its first year, it shall be for you from the sheep or goats, you shall take it. It shall be yours for examination, meaning you have to watch it to make sure it doesn't get any kind of physical imperfection, until the 14th day of this month. The entire congregation of the assembly of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. They shall take some of its blood and place it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they will eat it. They shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted over fire, and matzahs with bitter herbs. They shall eat it. So the mitzvah is that it has to be roasted over fire. And right now the Kollel is learning Pesachim, the Gemara about Pesach. And interestingly, the Gemara, not in a regular learning, but in a morning learning, and the Gemara says that it has to be strictly roasted over fire, means not through any other medium, meaning that it can't even touch the side of the oven, or it can't even be on a grate. It can't be like on a grill grate, because then it'll receive heat from the grate instead of from the fire, because the fire heats up the grate gets very hot, and then you get that heat from the contact heat from the grate. So the way they cooked it, actually, it's very strongly implied that they cooked it not on a wooden spit. It says pomegranate wood. They used like a wooden spit or skewer, whatever you call it, that went through the animal, through the mouth, out through the other end. And instead of like our picture of someone roasting with a pole horizontally over the fire, it was actually vertical. And its mouth was down. I think its mouth was downward. And it was a vertical pole, and it was thicker at the bottom, and that just kept it from slipping off. And it was inside an oven like this. So you had this like young sheep or young goat just like hanging out upside down, head downwards. What?
Upside down. You could get a rack you put
Right.
the chicken on.
Right.
The rear end goes in on the rack and the head goes up.
Right. So
That's so that all the fat goes out, not if it's the other way,
Right.
then all the fat's coming into the front.
right. One thing that it did do is that it drained the blood. I'm not sure if that's the reason. It does talk about that in the Gemara, is that since they slaughtered at the neck, so the blood would drain through that incision from the slaughtering, since it was hanging downward. Okay. Okay, you shall not eat it partially roasted or cooked in water. It can't be cooked in liquid. Only roasted over fire, its head, its legs with its innards. There's a disagreement in the Mishnah if the legs and innards were put inside, or if they were like stuffed inside the animal and cooked that way. And one opinion says that that's like cooking it in liquid, because it's cooked inside the body and the body heats it up. So so it would be put hung on the outside of the animal. But okay, you shall not leave any of it until morning. Any of it that is left until morning, you shall burn in fire. And in verse 11 on page 353, so shall you eat it, your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hands. You shall eat it in haste. It is a Pesach offering to Hashem. So the mitzvah was to eat it ready to go on the road, that we were like all packed up and ready to travel while we ate it. And in verse 12, I shall go through the land of Egypt. On this night I shall strike every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and against all the gods of Egypt, meaning the deities that they worshipped. I shall mete out punishment. I am Hashem, that all the idols in Egypt were destroyed on that day, on that night. The blood shall be a sign for you upon the houses where you are. I shall see the blood. I shall pass over you. There shall not be a plague of destruction upon you when I strike in the land of Egypt. And the Ramban says that this was a very dangerous thing, because the month of Nisan, which is where they were holding, is according to astrology, the astrological zodiac sign for that month is the Aries, which we call the ram. In Hebrew, it's called the tleh, the sheep. So that's what the Egyptians worshipped at that time. So we took this sheep, which is what they worshipped as the astrological sign for that time, and we slaughter it and eat it. So this was something that the Egyptians would be very angry about, but we did it in public, and there was nothing they could do about it. Hashem didn't allow them to touch us. And additionally, the Ramban says that just doing this was a disavowal of the Egyptian idolatry, because as we lived 210 years in Egypt, so many Jews adopted the idolatry of the Egyptians. And this was an act of disavowal, that I disavow all that idolatry, all that idol worship, by taking the zodiac sign that they worshipped for this time and slaughtered it. And another thing the commentaries say is that this was also what does the Aries, the ram, what does that symbolize? It's Pesach. The month of Nisan is the spring. Usually right after the spring equinox, it's the spring, and it's a time of renewal, rebirth. It's when the world sprouts again, and grass starts to grow, and flowers start to bloom, trees start to bloom, and animals are born, and it's a time of renewal, rebirth, and people might look at that and see us, the Jews are taken out of Egypt, and see that not as an act of God, but an act of the season. It's the season of rebirth caused the Jews to be reborn. And therefore we slaughter that zodiac sign, which is the symbol of the rebirth, the ram, the sheep, the lamb, I should say, which is a symbol of rebirth, to show that that's not what this is about at all. Okay, and in verse 14, we have the Pesach festival. Until now, we was talking about on that Pesach itself, the Pesach of that year. But now in verse 14, on the bottom of 353, this day shall become a remembrance for you, and you shall celebrate as a festival for Hashem. For your generations, as an eternal decree, you shall celebrate it. It's a yearly thing. Every year we celebrate Pesach on the 15th of Nisan. For a 7-day period shall you eat matzahs, but on the previous day you shall nullify the leaven from your homes. For anyone who eats leavened food, that soul shall be cut off from Israel from the first day to the 7th day, etc. And we have the mitzvah of not eating chametz, eating matzah, and on Pesach. So, and then he gave more details of the Pesach offerings. Oh, so this is so far has been the mitzvah, Hashem commanding Moshe. Then on verse 21 on the bottom of 355, Moshe called to all the elders of Israel and say to them, draw forth and buy for yourselves one of the flock. He now taught the elders to teach the people of the mitzvah. And in verse 25 on page 357, it shall be that when you come to the land that Hashem will give to you as he had spoken, and you shall observe the service, and it shall be that when your children say to you, what is the service to you? You shall say it is a Pesach offering to Hashem, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but he saved our household, and the people bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. So in the Haggadah, that we read on the Seder night, so it says that there are 4 sons, that the Torah speaks about 4 sons. And the source for that is in the Torah, that it says 4 different places in the Torah about us teaching our sons about Pesach. And this is one of them. This is actually the source of the wicked son, where it says, where am I? Exactly. It shall be that when your children say to you, what is this service to you? And it says they say to you, not that they ask you. And you shall say, it doesn't say you should say to them, you shall say. The commentaries kind of go to town on this. The Klei Yakar and the Maharal go to town on this question of the wicked son. Okay, so this is the source of the wicked son. So now in verse 29, It was at midnight that Hashem smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Paro sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and every firstborn animal. Paro rose at midnight, he and his servants and all of Egypt. There was a great outcry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was no corpse. In verse 31, he called to Moshe and Aaron at night and said, and the commentaries say that he told Moshe, "You'll never see my face," and Moshe agreed. So it says he called to Moshe and Aaron, that he was calling from from outside. And I think Rashi brings that he called to Moshe and Aaron at night, meaning that he didn't know where Moshe and Aaron were located. They always came to him. So he was going through the streets of Egypt, of the Jewish quarter, whatever. Moshe, Aaron, and kids were having fun with him and directing him this way, that way. And until finally he got to to where they were, and he called to them from outside and said, "Rise up, go out from among my people, even the children of Israel, go and serve Hashem as you have spoken, take all your stuff." And in verse 34, the people picked up its dough before it could become leavened. Their leftovers bound up in their garments upon their shoulders. The children of Israel carried out the word of Moshe. They requested from the Egyptians silver vessels, gold vessels, and garments. Hashem gave the people favor again, and the people allowed them to do that. Okay, so in verse 37 on page 359, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from the children and the women. Also, a mixed multitude went up with them, a mix of nations of Egyptians and other nationalities that were in Egypt that wanted to leave with them. And flock and cattle, very much livestock. They baked the dough that they took out of Egypt into unleavened cakes, for they could not be leavened, for they were driven from Egypt, for they could not delay, nor had they made provisions for themselves.
How far is
It's actually a long way. 37. Let's see if I don't remember the number. Oh, Rashi brings from Ramses to Sukkot. He says it's 120 mil. A mil is assumed to be about an 18-minute walk, about a mile, and about an 18-minute walk. So it's a tremendous distance. And the Medrash says that this was a case of Kfitzas Haderech, was a case of the shortening of the way, that they got to their destination much quicker than they should have naturally gotten there.
72 miles.
72 miles? Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's what your Chumash says?
Yes, you think I made it up?
Well, I mean, I'm just either that or you did the math. I know you're with these professors,
Yeah.
you have to be careful.
This is in the Chumash.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's there's actually a disagreement how long a meal is. So I says 18, that's the standard, is 18 minutes, which is comes from a Trumas Hadeshen, which is a medieval commentary, an Ashkenazi commentary. But many of the poskim, actually, the Vilna Gaon very strongly disagrees with that, and he says it's more like 22 minutes or something, rather than 18. But I think most people, in general, it's assumed to be about 18. Okay, an 18-minute walk. So, where am I here? Oh, so it says here that in verse 39, it says, they baked the dough that they took out from Egypt into unleavened cakes, for they could not be leavened, for they were driven from Egypt, for they could not delay, nor had they made provisions for themselves. What does that mean? That they baked the dough into unleavened cakes because they were driven out so fast. It was Pesach. They got the mitzvah, 7 days you have Pesach, and you can't have any chametz. So they had to make it matzah because that was the mitzvah of not having chametz. So I think it's the Chizkuni, but some of the commentaries say that this is the source. There's an opinion in the Gemara that our Haggadah actually happens to go with, that that first Pesach in Egypt Pesach only lasted 1 day. Every subsequent Pesach was a 7-day period, and that was the mitzvah of having Pesach for 7 days with no chametz, was for all generations. But that Pesach itself, the first Pesach in Egypt, was only a 1-day holiday. And so therefore, if they would have had time, they would have baked bread, but they didn't have time to let it rise, so they baked it as matzahs. And that's our Haggadah seems to go with that when we say at the end of Magid, we say that anyone who doesn't say these 3 things on Pesach doesn't fulfill their obligation. So it said that what's this matzah about? It's that we left so quickly, we didn't even have time for the dough to rise. But the Ramban, the Das Akanim, which is from the Tosafists, and the Rush, Rabbeinu Asher, they understand this, that they say you could read this differently. It says the people picked up its dough before it could become leavened because of the mitzvah of matzah. They had the mitzvah not to have chametz, to have matzah instead, so they picked it up before they could be leavened. The leftovers bound up in garments upon their shoulders, and they, oh, am I reading the wrong part? Oh, I was reading the wrong verse, sorry. In verse 39, they baked the dough that they took out from Egypt into unleavened cakes, because it couldn't be matzah, for they could not be leavened, for they were driven from Egypt, for they could not delay, nor had they made provisions for themselves. You're saying this that it says, for they could not be leavened, for they were driven out from Egypt. That's not going, it couldn't be leavened because they were driven out from Egypt. That's why they baked the dough, they baked the dough that they took out from Egypt. Meaning, if you had to make matzah, why are they taking dough out? If you carry dough, if we leave it for 18 or so minutes, it becomes chametz. So in order to stop something from becoming chametz, if you're leaving it out, you have to keep working with it. You have to keep kneading it, or else if you just leave it alone, it'll rise. So why would they carry dough out with them instead of baking it in Egypt and taking it out as matzah? And to that's what the Torah is telling us. They were chased out so quickly, they didn't have time to bake it in Egypt. So they had to carry out the dough and bake it outside Egypt. Okay, so that's the approach of the Ramban, the Tosafos, and the Rush. Okay, so now moving on, there's another thing I wanted to stop on, and then I think we're going to finish. So in verse 40, it says, the habitation of the children of Israel during which they dwelled in Egypt was 430 years. It was at the end of 430 years, and it was on that very day that all the legions of Hashem left the land of Egypt. So this 430 years seems to be very contradictory, because in the covenant between the parts, going back to Parshas Lech Lecha, I'll get it eventually. Should have marked it, I'm sorry. Yeah, after Noah. Oh, I'm way too far. Sorry. I don't know how I ended up there, but I ended up at Parsha too late. About page 67, probably. Yeah, about page 67. Way back. So this is in Parshas Lech Lecha, Bereshis chapter 15, verse 7. Or I'll back up a little bit. Chapter 15 on page 67. After these events, this was a war between 4 kings and 5 kings, between the king of Sodom and Amorah and others against Kedor Omer and others. The word of Hashem came to Avram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Avram, I'm a shield for you. Your reward is very great." And Avram said, "My Lord Hashem Elokim, what can you," etc. And then he said in verse 6, and he trusted in Hashem and he reckoned it to him as a righteousness. Then in verse 7, he said to him, I am Hashem who brought you out of Orkastim to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, my Lord Hashem Elokim, whereby shall I know I am to inherit it? And he said, take to me 3 heifers, whatever, split them, and you split them, put half on each side, hence the covenant between the parts. And in verse 12, and on page 69, and it happened as the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Avram. Behold, a great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Avram, know with certainty that your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own, and they will serve them, and they will oppress them 400 years. But also the nation that they will serve I shall judge, and afterward they will leave with great wealth. And as for you, you shall come to your ancestors in peace, you shall be buried in good old age, and the 4th generation shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite shall not be full until then. So what's this? So here it says that it's going to be 400 years. So, and in fact, if you look through, you could actually calculate, knowing the ages of different people, you could actually see that they were only in Egypt for 210 years. So the sages say that the 400 years mentioned as prophecy to Avram, it doesn't say that they're going to be in Egypt 400 years. It says, your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own, and they will serve them, they will oppress them 400 years. And he says that that's referring to your offspring being aliens in a land not theirs will be 400 years, referring to from the birth of Yitzchak. That from the birth of Yitzchak, they will be aliens in a land not theirs because you will have a son, Yitzchak, and you don't own the land of Canaan. So he will be a stranger in a land not yours. And that's 400 years until we leave Egypt. So now what's this 430 years that it's saying here? So the commentaries say, Rashi quotes, that's referring to actually the time of the covenant between the parts was 30 years before the birth of Yitzchak. So it's saying from the time of that covenant until we left Egypt was 430 years. Am I clear with that? People are shaking their heads. Okay. Okay, good. So the Ramban is very bothered by this. He says, that's very nice, but let's try to look at the chronology here. That Avraham, we know, was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. He was 99 when he got a bris milah. He was 100 when Yitzchak was born. So 30 years before that would put the covenant between the parts when Avraham was 70 years old. And that's problematic because if you go back to the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha, this is page 55, verse 4. So Avram went as Hashem had spoken to him. This is Hashem told Avram, go from the land, your birthplace, etc. So Avram went as Hashem had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Avram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So it says that Avram was 75 years before he left Haran. That seems to be before he ever got to the land of Canaan. Next Parsha, it said he was 75 years old. Next Parsha, we have the covenant between the parts. After he has some adventures in the land of Canaan, he goes to Egypt, he goes back to Canaan. There's this battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And then he's somehow 5 years younger. So the Ramban says, from the Seder Olam, etc., that the Torah is not necessarily in chronological order. That things that, just because things are put in a certain order in the Torah doesn't mean that that's necessarily the order that events happened. And in fact, this covenant, this prophecy of the covenant between the parts took place years before that, the prophecy that actually he had right before that. And I'm trying to make sense of this. I'm really struggling to make sense of the chronology. Right, it's not in chronological order, but when and where things happened. Because from the language of the Ramban and others, the commentaries on the Seder Olam especially. So Seder Olam is a book of the history of the Torah written by it's ascribed to written in the period of the Mishnah, by one of the great Tanaim, by one of the great sages of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi. And he says this as well. He says that the covenant between the parts took place when Avram was 70 before, and the commentaries there seem to say that he came to Eretz Yisrael, then he went back to Haran. He came to the land of Canaan, I should say. Had this prophecy of the covenant between the parts. Then he went back to Haran, got his wife and kids, and God brought his wife and Lot, etc., and went back to the land of Israel, and then had these adventures with Egypt and this battle with the 4 kings and 5 kings. That seems to be how they're understanding it. Tosfos, though, Tosfos in his commentary to Brachos, actually he goes through and he has a different proof that Avraham was these events were out of order based on when the battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings had to have taken place. He says Avraham would have had to have been 73 then. He said Avraham would have had to have been 73 in the battle between the 4 kings and 5 kings, and he was 70 at the covenant between the parts. So he says for that reason it's not in chronological order. But that would seem to contradict this that we're saying, that he went back to Haran and stayed there for 5 years. And additionally, there's a Sforno. I'm just speaking this out, what I'm struggling with. But the Sforno seems to understand. The Ramban says something along these lines also. There's 3 different Rambans in 3 different places where he discusses this that I've seen. But the Sforno seems to be saying that prophecy of that prophecy and the covenant between the parts is introduced. I am the God who took you out of Ur Kasdim. And our sages understand Ur Kasdim means the fire of the Kasdim. It means that he was saved from a fiery furnace that he was thrown into by Nimrod. The Sforno seems to say that this covenant between the parts happened immediately after that. After he was saved by Hashem from the furnace of Nimrod, from the Ur Kasdim, right after that, this prophecy took place, which would mean that it took place in Haran, which is very interesting. I'm not sure about about that, because in the prophecy it says, "I'm going to give you this land," which implies the land that you're on right now. So the Ramban seems to be okay with the idea of it meaning the land that you're headed to and that I intend to give you. But like I said, the chronology here needs a lot of study to actually get straight. And right now I have a lot of thoughts swirling in my mind, but I don't have a good feel for the order of events, actually, how it exactly had happened. Okay, and to conclude the Parsha, just wanted to just bring that out, that what you see in the Torah as this thing happened, and this thing happened, and this thing happened, it's not necessarily in chronological order. It usually is, but the Ramban says if we see that it's not a question, that it's not in chronological order, because the Torah groups things by topic. Sometimes it says a whole story and then goes back to something that was happening to someone else, and it's not necessarily in chronological order. Okay, so now they left Egypt. And then we have the mitzvah to sanctify the firstborns. On chapter 13, the bottom of 361, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first issue of every womb among the children of Israel, of man and beast is mine." And Moshe said to the people, "Remember this day upon which you departed from Egypt." We have a mitzvah to remember leaving Egypt. In 363, from the house of bondage, we fulfill that by the end of Shema, where every day twice a day actually, but every day we mention that I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. We remember departing from Egypt. Today you're leaving in the months of springtime, meaning Hashem even took us out in a pleasant time to travel, not in the heat of the summer or in the rain of the winter. And it shall come to pass, etc. You'll fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach. And then it says in verse 8, "And you shall tell your son on that day, saying, it is because of this that Hashem acted on my behalf when we left Egypt." This is the source for the son who doesn't even know how to ask. And in verse 9, "It shall be for you a sign on your arm and a reminder between your eyes." Here we have the mitzvah of tefillin. And this is one of the 4 places in the Torah where we have the mitzvah of tefillin. And it's one of the 4 chapters of the Torah that are written in the tefillin. So this section of the Torah from the beginning of chapter 13, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, "Sanctify to me every firstborn," or at least from "sanctify to me every firstborn," until from year to year. That's one chapter in the Tefillin. We have Shema, Vahaya, and then this next section is another chapter that's in the Tefillin. And from verse 11, "It shall come to pass when Hashem will bring you to the land of Canaanites, you shall set apart every issue of the first womb to Hashem." Again, every issue of every Jewish male firstborn, who's not a Levi or a Kohen, every kosher animal, and every even a donkey we redeem with a sheep. And in verse 13 on page 365, "Every first issue donkey you shall redeem with a lamb or kid. If you did not redeem it, you shall axe the back of its neck." You break the back of its neck with an axe. "And you shall redeem every human firstborn among your sons. It shall be when your son will ask you at some future time, 'What is this?' you shall say to him, 'With a strong hand Hashem removed us from Egypt, from the house of bondage.'" So far in this parsha, we have the question of the wicked, the one who doesn't know how to ask. This is the source of the question of the simple son, the Tam. And the question of the wise son will be later in Devar. And in verse 15, "It had happened when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to send us out, that Hashem killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of man to the firstborn of beast. Therefore I offer to Hashem all male first issue of the womb, and I shall redeem all the firstborn of my sons." And again, the mitzvah of tefillin here, which is why this chapter is in tefillin. "And it shall be a sign upon your arm and an ornament between your eyes, for with a strong hand Hashem removed us from Egypt." Okay, shkoyach. Everyone have a great Shabbos.